How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is Travis Shaddix. Thanks so much for joining us. On this episode, we're going to talk about different species of turf grasses and which ones require more water than other, particularly Bermuda grass versus Zoysia and tall fescue versus Kentucky bluegrass. You may have heard, or you may have had the belief or opinion that Zoysia grass uses less water. You may have heard Bermuda grass uses less water. You may have heard tall fescue is more drought tolerant and creates more roots than Kentucky bluegrass and so forth. But have you ever actually seen an article that compared them all in the same setting? You may not have. And tonight, the episode we're going to talk about is exactly that. One article that has them all in it, and it compares them all under the same conditions. And we'll see which one of these wins. And then within warm season grasses and within cool season grasses, we're going to figure out which one may be a better option for you in situations where you have limited water. Okay? So this is Turfgrass Epistemology. If you're here, you're maybe wondering, how do we know what we know about turfgrass science? If you are a new member, please don't forget to look in the post of YouTube and find the Facebook group invitation, and you may choose to join that. Answer those two questions, and you'll be let in. The Facebook group's seems to be going well. There's some good questions on there. We see some photographs of members that are beginning to renovate their lawns or preparing for renovation. Some members are, just putting on, various activities they have going on, asking questions. So I'm enjoying how that's going. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, Joe Calla. I forget. So Joe Calla says, remember to like and subscribe. Appreciate that reminder, Joe. Thank you. And please, it helps a lot, helps the channel out a lot. For whatever reason, I underestimated the value of TikTok. I, believe it or not, am not on TikTok, but I do have an account on TikTok that automatically gets updated with videos. The same thing with X or Twitter. I'm not really on Twitter at all, but I do have an account that automatically gets updated with various small clips of the show. And TikTok seems to be much more active than Twitter ever was in terms of number of views and number of engagements. And it tends to bring a lot of people over to YouTube. So if you're here from TikTok or from YouTube, then welcome. This is the live show if you're watching this on Tuesday evening. We also have a members only show on Monday mornings as well. So if you want to watch the members only show, you'll need to be a member, and it's available on Monday mornings. Okay, so now let's get to it. We've been going over water. This is not going to be a water frequency paper we're going to go over tonight, but I'm going to briefly, actually I need to include this. I forgot to add that in there, but we're going to briefly talk about some of the literature we've gone over just real quick, because this is a relatively short article and we have time to go over a review some of the papers we've been going over. Some of the concept oftentimes is light and frequent applications versus deep and infrequent, and I have here on the screen the various literature that I've gone over in the last several weeks on that subject. And if you're under the impression that you should be, not that you can, but that you should be watering your turfgrass deep and infrequently rather than light and frequent, then let me, divorce you of that notion. The literature that I've gone over does not support that. It supports the concept that you can do it, but not that you should do it, or not that doing it would result in the greatest quality turf. It may result in acceptable quality turf occasionally. But if you want the greatest quality turf, the literature doesn't support this deep and infrequent watering, at least none of the literature I've gone over yet, which surprises me, but that's just the stuff we've been going over. Okay, just the way it is. So it seems to be that if you're going to water, then you're going to water on ET, you're going to water 3/4 of an inch a week, whatever the case is in your area, you need to split that up 2 or 3 times a week over that week, not just one application on Monday of 3/4 of an inch. It should be broken up in 3 equal portions throughout the week, or 4 equal portions throughout the week, in order to maximize your quality. So some of you, especially some of the ones that, some of the members, you all are not really interested in just having an okay lawn like what I have. I just have an okay lawn. It's not great. It's not bad. It's just what it is. It's fine. You all are interested in having like the best quality lawn you can possibly achieve. And for those situations, the literature I have on the screen here clearly shows that the light and frequent application of water is going to result in better quality or superior quality turf more frequently than deep and infrequent. Or there may not be any difference, but there's not any slam dunk on this deep and infrequent application of water. The Carr paper, I forgot to insert the Carr paper, but the Carr paper also showed that the light and frequent application of water more frequently resulted in superior, it was, I think it was dark green color index or percent green tissue. I can't remember what it was, but there was a variable in there that was more frequently superior under the light and frequent application of water. Okay. So again, I have 7-8 papers, and there's only maybe one that showed a little bit of additional quality. The Jordan 2003 paper, a little bit of additional quality on 1 or 2 dates out of 12. Okay. There was superior quality in the Ritchie paper in 1 year on the deep and infrequent, but the superior quality occurred on the light and frequent irrigation on the prior year. So that's sort of a split. All right. So that's what we've been going over. I wanted to update the audience on that, the table we can keep in track of. And we're not going to go over the frequency of application of water time. We're going to be talking about species, particularly 2 warm season and 2 cool season grass species. Okay. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll come back to the chat periodically. If not, I'll address everything at the end of the show tonight, or at least I'll try to remember to. Okay. Any questions before I start? Oh, Mike Conroy says he's already changed his irrigation to every other day, 80% of ET. Let you know next month. There you go. Yeah. I mean, before I started going over the water literature, Mike, I would have said, oh, just water it once or twice a week. And, the deep and infrequent. I would have said that because that's what I've heard from water specialists throughout my career. But it seems to me that you can do that for sure. It seems like you can do that. But if you want superior turf quality, it seems like every other day or every third day sort of application would be more consistently superior. Your turf grass would be more consistently superior quality than deep and infrequent. So good to hear that you've adjusted your program according to align with the evidence. Okay, this paper tonight we're going to go over is entitled Minimum Water Requirements of 4 Turf Grasses in the Transition Zone by Fu, Jack Fry, and Bingru Wang. Now, Jack Fry has been at Kansas for a long time, and Bingru's very well respected as well. I don't know the Jin Min Fu author. I'm not sure. He must have been a graduate student. I'm not sure who he or she is, but the other 2 authors are extremely well known, extremely well respected authors in the turfgrass industry. And this paper was published in HortScience. So this paper is available for free right now. You can go download it at it's going to be ASHS, American Society of Horticultural Sciences.org. HortScience in 2004. It's in volume 39. You can go download it for free and read it to your heart's content. I'm going to skip over some sections in this because it's not particularly pertinent to what I want to talk about tonight, but feel free to download it and read it yourself, okay? So let's see about this whole concept of Zoysia grass is superior in drought tolerance. It has great drought tolerance. I've heard this for a long time when I was in the industry and even in academia. And then what happened, unfortunately, was some HOAs were sold a bill of goods, sold a bunch of BS, and started taking out things like St. Augustine grass and started taking out Bermuda grass and putting in Zoysia grass with the concept that they were going to save water. Their turf grass was still going to be the same quality essentially as what they had before, but they're going to save water because they're putting in Zoysia grass. I've never heard of anything so asinine in all my life, but that has happened regularly. Okay, and I know a lot of people like Kentucky bluegrass. There's a lot of value to Kentucky bluegrass, as there is a lot of value to Zoysia grass. Okay. But when you put in Kentucky bluegrass, you've moved, in my opinion, especially on a home lawn, you've moved from the world of a normal homeowner, normal lawn, to a serious hobby, a serious aficionado of high quality turf. Because Kentucky bluegrass you can't turn your back on Kentucky bluegrass and just walk away, cut it with a rotary mower 2 or 3 inches. You can't do that and have it look good. Kentucky bluegrass can look, and often does look, extremely good, but it has to be managed different than Kentucky bluegrass. It's not a cool season grass that is as tolerant or resistant to a lot of the stresses that tall fescue is. Okay. So if you want Kentucky bluegrass, great. Knock yourself out, have it, no problem. But it's going to require different inputs than tall fescue, and one of them is water, and we're going to see that tonight. Okay? Okay, minimum water requirements of for turfgrasses in the transition zone. Turfgrass water use rates often exceed natural precipitation, and during extended periods without rainfall, restrictions may impose limiting water that can be applied to turf areas. As such, turf researchers have sought to identify turf species and cultivars that have drought resistance and irrigation management techniques to reduce water inputs. Some grasses, such as Bermuda grass and tall fescue, have deep root systems that help them avoid drought when precipitation is limited. Others, such as Zoysia, have a shallower root system but tolerate drought using osmotic adjustments and other physiological mechanisms. Now, I'm not discounting the reality that the drought tolerance or avoidance mechanism is largely based on root mass and the ability to generate roots. Okay, that's pretty clear. But in this paper, we're also going to see that the species, particularly Bermuda grass, the cells of the turf itself are more resistant to breakage under drought conditions. They don't leak cell constituents or cell components like the other turf grasses do. In other words, they don't break open as easily under drought stress. So there's more than one thing going on here, not just roots. Over the past 20 years, several researchers have addressed the subject of deficit irrigation, returning water in amounts less than evapotranspiration as a water conservation technique. Turf managers overseeing installation of new golf courses, housing developments, and other turf areas are commonly queried by governmental administrators as to how much irrigation water will be required to maintain an acceptable quality turf in the landscape. And that is the truth. And that's where a lot of people go down the wrong road. Okay. The government, employees, elected officials, whoever it may be, are asking questions that is the right question, but they're often asking it to the wrong person. They may be asking, well, which turf requires the least amount of water, or which turf can be acceptable with the least amount of water? All those are valid questions. But you better be asking it to the right person. If you ask it to a Zoysia farmer, he's going to say Zoysia grass. If you ask it to a Bermuda farmer, he's going to say Bermuda grass. You ask it to a St. Augustine grass farmer, he's going to say, well, St. Augustine grass uses the least amount of water. You better be asking the question to the right person. And oftentimes, no offense, but the turf manager or the landscape manager is not the right person. They're not as well versed in the mechanics of turf species and their differentiation of drought tolerance or drought avoidance. Oftentimes, they don't even know the difference between drought avoidance and drought tolerance. So if you're going to be asking questions and then you're going to make a decision on that answer, ask the right person. And it's usually someone like a breeder. A breeder would be an excellent person to ask, or a turf physiologist or a specialist in that area. If you ask me, I'm going to go, I'm not a turf physiologist. I'm not a turf species breeder. Let's go ask somebody who's a turf physiologist who specializes in turf physiology and turf water use. And there's plenty of those people around. Okay, but that's what I'm asking. You better be asking the right person, Mr. Mayor and Mr. and Mrs. Councilman, if you're going to be making decisions off the response, because you're not going to find a Zoysia grass farmer that's going to say you should be putting in St. Augustine grass. That's just reality. However, the amount of water required to maintain acceptable quality of various turfgrass species throughout the growing season in the transition zone, a loosely defined region between temperate and subtropical climates, has not been determined. This has absolutely zip to do with this topic tonight, but I got into a debate down in South Florida with with a faculty member about this thing of subtropical. His argument was South Florida is tropical. And I said, well, why do you think it's tropical? He goes, well, the temperature and the heat and the rain, and this is a tropical climate. It's not subtropical climate. Fort Lauderdale is not a subtropical climate. It's a tropical climate. And I go, well, I thought the definition of tropical climate was the climate between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Isn't that tropical climates? Isn't that the definition? And he got all up. I'm like, so we are similar to tropical climates, but we're not within the tropics. He got all mad at me, got upset. Because obviously there's just an imaginary line called the Tropic of Cancer. That's just an arbitrary line we drew on the planet, you know. And there's tropical climates that kind of vary in and out of there, but he got all upset. That has nothing to do. That just reminded me, that phrase here, subtropical climate, just reminded me of that day. I was sitting out underneath the awning there, underneath the patio at Fort Lauderdale Research Center, having lunch, talking to him about this. Is ridiculous. Arguing over the definition of tropical and subtropical. Anyway, okay. The authors go on here and discuss a little bit of the literature on electrolyte leakage in these paragraphs. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot, but you can feel free to read it. The objective of this study was to determine the minimum water requirements to maintain acceptable visual quality and deficit irrigation effects on this L is leaf relative water content. So the leaf relative water content and electrolyte leakage of Zoysia grass, Bermuda grass, tall fescue, and bluegrass in the transition zone. So when it comes to the electrolyte leakage and the leaf relative water content, to me, they're important for scientists. There's no question those are important variables for scientists. But those are a means to explain the end, right? So don't get hung up when I get to those data about electrolyte leakage and leaf relative water content. They're good to know, but as a practitioner, I don't think they're useful to you at all. As a scientist, it helps us understand the system better and explain what's going on better. But for you, what you care about is the quality of the turf grass during drought and the amount of water that was needed to maintain that. That's what we care about. So that's what I'll kind of focus on tonight. Okay, materials and methods. Growing conditions and treatments. This experiment was conducted using an automated mobile rainout shelter at the Rocky Ford Turfgrass Research Center in Manhattan, Kansas from June 4th to September 14th in 2001 and from June 3rd to September 13th, 2002. Now, if you don't know what an automated rainout shelter is, I showed a photograph of a rainout shelter on Monday morning show, and it's basically a small outdoor glass house with it's not glass, it's just like plastic, like clear plastic. And it covers the turf grass and prevents rain and water from falling on it. But a mobile one is often set on like tracks, either railroad tracks or steel tracks or roller tracks or something. You put the entire apparatus on a roller, and that is set up on a instrument or a trigger that when it gets so much rainfall, it moves the shelter over the treated area and then moves it back off whenever it stops raining. And those can be very valuable because the actual canopy that's preventing the water falling on the turf, it does impart a little bit of shade, not much, but it does impart a little bit of shade. And there's a little bit of a microclimate effect when you have that over the turf. And so to minimize that effect and to have more of a real life, real world data scenario, we want to move that off and leave the turf open to all the variables. And then when it starts to rain, it just covers it during that period. So it gives it a little bit more of a realistic, practical setting. And it explains it here I don't have a photograph, or I would show you a photograph of the ones we've used, but I just don't have one. During dry weather, the shelter rested just north of the study area. The shelter was triggered by a minimum of 0.38 millimeters of precipitation and required about 2 minutes to move south on rails and completely cover the test area. 1 hour after precipitation ceased, the shelter returned to its resting designation. Okay. The experimental design was a split plot with turfgrass species at the whole plot and irrigation level as the subplot. So basically, I don't know if for those who care to know, anyone know about this, but split plots are kind of what they sound. We're gonna have one treatment, okay? Let's call it nitrogen rate. But let's say we also maybe are interested in mowing height. Well, we'll just take all the nitrogen rates and set them in the main plots. And then we'll just split that by mowing height. We'll just cut half of it be mowing height, and then the other half be a lower mowing height. And that would be a split plot design. Actually, technically, I think that'd be a strip plot. But you see my point. You're splitting the plots in half or some other way so that you can get, you can ask another question, essentially, is what you're doing. Okay. There's good and bad things to that. You're reducing the end. So if you're reducing your degrees of freedom, if there is an interaction, but you're increasing your degrees of freedom if there's no interaction. I don't know if you want to know all about that, but regardless. Very common model in our world. Whole plots measured 6 meters by 2 meters and consist of Meyer Zoysia and midlawn Bermuda grass, falcon too-tall fescue, and brilliant bluegrass. So these are all pretty common varieties of these various species. Probably some of you all have those right now still. All whole plots were established by sodding in spring 2000 on a river-deposited silt loam soil. So that's the soil they're dealing with a pH of 6.4 and a P&K level of 41 and 367 parts per million. Now, I highlighted this in orange because I wanted to point out, because I'm a soil fertility specialist, this pH means absolutely nothing to me. And the P&K level, P of 41 and a K of 367 mean absolutely nothing to me. And I'm letting you know that here on this episode, because if you send me something on an email and you say my P was 41, I'm going to say, so what? I don't know what that means, because I don't know the extractant that was used. I don't know the depth that it was taken. I have to know at least those two things in order to help interpret that number. And this particular publication didn't include any of the soil testing data. I don't know if they used Malic 1, Malic 3, ammonium acetate, Bray, Olson. I don't know what they used in terms of extractant. I don't know if they sampled at 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches. I have no clue. So when they put this in here, these authors said 41 and 367. They may have put that in there, and the editor or reviewer said, you don't need all the detail, remove the detail. That may be a result of reviewer, or it may be a result of the author not putting it in. I don't know why it's not in there, but because it's not in there, I have no clue whether or not the soil was deficient or excessive in phosphorus and potassium. And the pH of 6.4, I don't know if that was done on a 1-to-1, on a 1-to-2, on a 1-to-10. I don't know. I don't know what it was done on. DI water, buffer pH. I don't know what that pH was done on. So I can't really say whether 6.4 is a meaningful number to you or something you can actually relate to in your world, because I don't know how it was conducted or how it was measured. Just for our own knowledge base level, we need to know those things. Subplots measured 1.2 by 1.8 meters and consisted of irrigation levels. And the irrigation levels were this, okay, guys? 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% of evapotranspiration. Water was applied twice weekly using a metered handheld hose with a fan spray nozzle attached. Deficit irrigation amounts were determined by taking the fraction of water use of a lysimeter grown turf receiving 100% ET. So they used a very similar system where they had lysimeters and they measured the change in water, the change in weight of the lysimeter, but they knew all the dry mass and then they knew all the completely saturated mass of the lysimeter, and they could weigh it and then determine water loss. And the water loss would be a measure of evapotranspiration. So that's how they did that. That's all fine. The day before the study began each year, here you go, the lysimeters were soaked until water was draining through the bottom of each lysimeter. When drainage had ceased, each was sealed on the bottom end with a plastic bag, weighed to determine its reference mass, and returned to the respective holes in the plot area. Evapotranspiration was measured using the water balance method. So that gives you an idea how we measure that in the field. There's a lot of different ways to measure ET in the field, but that would be one of them. In other words, if I know all the mass in this column, it's a lysimeter like a pipe, and I know all the mass, and if it's dry and there's nothing wet in there, and then I wet it, and I know all the mass when it's wet, then I know the total mass when it's saturated, and then you can let it drain, which is what they did, and so theoretically that'd be at filled capacity if you let it drain for 24 hours. Did they say to let it drain? When drainage had ceased, so that'd be ceased due to gravity, so that'd be fill capacity. And then you know the weight of that column at fill capacity. And then any loss of water, any gain of water would be a measure of ET or a measure of gaining of water through irrigation or rainfall. It's very common. Okay, so they did this for 2 years, okay, with Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, Bermuda grass, and Zoysia grass. But in the second year, you'll notice there will be no Kentucky bluegrass data. And the reason is here. Severe decline of bluegrass in 2002 precluded data collection. This was due to a combination of high bluegrass bilbug populations and high temperatures. So in other words, the bluegrass got hammered by a lot of heat and a lot of pest damage, and it wiped it out. So that's one of the risks of using bluegrass if you're not going to understand the risks involved. It can be, and often is, far better quality than tall fescue if managed correctly, there's no doubt. but it needs to be managed correctly. Turf was mown twice weekly at 5 and 6 centimeters using a 5 to 6 centimeters. So like say 1 to 1.25 inch. I'm sorry, 2 to 2.25 inches. Using a walk-behind rotary mower, and clippings were returned. Nitrogen from urea was applied as 1 pound on 2 tall fescue and bluegrass 4 times a year, and then it was applied at 1 pound to zoysia and bermuda grass. Also 4 times a year. So 4 pounds a hand were being applied to both these turf grasses. Data were collected on ET, turf quality, the leaf relative water content, and electrolyte leakage. Evapotranspiration rate was determined twice weekly by measuring change in mass of lysimeter, which I already mentioned. Turf quality was rated visually once weekly using a 0 to 9 scale, and 6 was deemed to be acceptable. Leaves measuring around 10 millimeters long and to provide 1 gram fresh weight were sampled randomly at 2 locations in each plot in order to measure the leaf relative water content. Leaf electrolyte leakage was measured, and you can read about how they did that here. Basically, electrolyte leakage is this. Think of it, this is a simplified version, but they put they just put the leaves in a solution, and they measure the conductivity of that solution. Then they break all the cells of the leaf open, and they measure it again. They either break them open by freezing it, or in this case, they autoclaved it and broke all the cells open and measured the salt content or the electrical conductivity again. And through that, they can measure the relative electrolyte leakage, which is relative right here. Relative electrolyte leakage was calculated as the initial, what do they measure C as? The initial conductivity of the solution divided by the maximum conductivity of the solution times 100. So that gives you an idea of how they would measure the, really what they're measuring is the cells that are broken relative to the total maximum amount of cells that could be broken. Does that make sense? Oftentimes freeze tolerance studies are measured that way, where they want to know, okay, how many cells are leaking now relative to how many total cells could possibly leak. And that's a measure of the ability of that turfgrass to resist cold tolerance or heat tolerance, or in this case, drought tolerance. Okay, it doesn't really mean anything to you in a pragmatic sense, but for scientists, it helps us explain. Like, for example, if one turfgrass had less electrolyte leakage and it was also more resistant to drought, you could infer from that the cells of that particular turfgrass, for some reason, you don't know why yet, but for some reason are more capable of maintaining its rigidity or maintaining its structure and not breaking open under the conditions of drought stress or cold stress or whatever. Okay, you don't know why it's happening, but you do know it is happening in that case. Okay, let's get to the results and discussion. I'm going to read some of this, but a lot of this, the reason I like this particular paper is because a lot of it's shown in graphs, and they're pretty easy to understand, okay? I'm not going to talk a lot about evapotranspiration, but I'll read this paragraph. It says, bluegrass and tall fescue had similar evapotranspiration rates in 2001, which were higher than those for Bermuda grass and Zoysia grass, table 1. In 2002, tall fescue had more evapotranspiration than Bermuda or Zoysia grass. Okay, so table 1, I think it's up here. So this is what I'm talking about. They broke apart very easily, very carefully with the species, cool season and warm season. So the cool seasons were always higher than both of the warm season grasses in terms of total evapotranspiration and daily evapotranspiration in both years. Remember, bluegrass was dead in the second year, but tall fescue required more water. In other words, the cool season grasses right here, very clearly, are requiring more water than the warm season grasses by a factor of about maybe 20%. Total millimeters of water was around 550 or 60 millimeters for the cool season, and somewhere around 400 for the warm season. So you're going to require, the cool season grasses are going to require more water than the warm season grasses. That shouldn't be a shock to anybody. The warm season grasses just don't require as much water. Okay. Now let's get to the minimum water requirement in turf quality. Turfgrass species and respective irrigation levels at which season-long acceptable turf quality was maintained each year were. Okay, now we're talking about acceptable quality. I'm going to show it all so you can see the maximum quality as well. But when you talk about acceptable quality, it's just the minimum level. So that may appeal to many people listening to this, but it may not. Some people may be looking at what is the maximum quality, and so we're going to show that as well. But they're going to talk about the acceptable level. So to get acceptable bluegrass, they needed to apply, in this particular case, under the conditions of this study, acceptable bluegrass was only achieved, the entire study, using 100% ET. Okay? Tall fescue was maintained in 2001 using 60% ET, in 2002 at 80% ET. So tall fescue right there, it tells you it didn't need as much water as Kentucky bluegrass. The Bermuda grass was only 60% ET in both years, and Zoysia grass was needed 80% ET in both years. So if there's one thing you can take away from this, without even looking at any graphs yet, it's this paragraph right here. It tells you right there, for acceptable turf, Zoysia grass is going to need a minimum of 80% ET. Bermuda grass is going to need about 60% ET. Bluegrass is going to need 100%. And tall fescue was 61 year and 80 the other. Okay? The graphs tell a more obvious story, but that's pretty clear. Okay? Bluegrass and Zoysia grass were the most sensitive to deficit irrigation, as reflected by the range of quality scores across treatments in 2001. Figure 1. So let's look at Figure 1. This is probably the most useful figure in this entire paper. So let's look at this and a little closer up if I can get it all on the screen here. Okay, so what we're looking at here is our 4 panels on the same figure. Visual qualities on the X or the Y-axis going from 0 to 10, and the days after treatment is on the X-axis. Each panel represents an individual turf: bluegrass, Bermuda grass, fescue, and Zoysia. On each panel are the 5 irrigation treatments: 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% ET. So let's just start at the very top. On the top left corner, we have Kentucky bluegrass. And all the Kentucky bluegrass started at 8. Okay, so which is what, if you sodded bluegrass and you got it grown in and looking good, it would probably be an 8. It's very good grass. Then you start to impose irrigation restrictions on it. And you see in only 20 days, which is right here, 20 days, if you are applying only 20% ET, it's already a quality level of about 4.5 or 5. It's already not acceptable in only 3 weeks at 20% ET. Okay? Even at 40% ET, which is right here, at 20 days out, it's not acceptable any longer. At 60% ET, it's just marginally acceptable at 60% ET at 20 days out. It did not take long for Kentucky bluegrass to take a dive. When you start restricting the water, it starts to dive quick. And like I said, I've said this, I don't know, maybe 50 times on the show since I've started this show. The most important variable in turfgrass management is water management. It's either too much water or not enough water. You must optimize water before anything else, before your soil test, before you sharpen your mower blades, before you trim that tree up. Whatever the case, whatever you come up with is not as important as managing water to optimum levels. Okay? And you see that right here in Kentucky bluegrass. It didn't take long. You went on vacation and the irrigation was off and you came back and it's brown. That might have been a long vacation, 20 days. But see my point. And it stayed unacceptable pretty much the entire time at 20, 40, and 60% ET after that first 20 days. Now, the 100% ET, look how poor it is. I mean, it's barely hanging on. It did dip below acceptable levels at about 70 days out, but I would say that it was probably acceptable for the most part the entire time at 100% ET. But 80% ET, again, was marginal. It's down there below acceptable levels, but it takes about 50 or 60 days to do that with Kentucky bluegrass. Okay? So I'm not knocking Kentucky Bluegrass. Some of the best cool season fairways and sport turf you'll always see is on Kentucky Bluegrass. But you got to know what you're doing. You better get the water dialed in correctly. You better have the right mowers. You better have the right management tools. That's all I'm saying. And it is not a drought-tolerant turf grass compared to tall fescue. What does tall fescue look like under the same exact conditions? This panel over here is tall fescue, and it started at an 8. We start reducing the water down to 20% ET. Look how long it took before it even got down to quality levels of 6. It took 50 days, 2 times longer than Kentucky Bluegrass for the 20% ET to even get down that low. And even then it was, 5. It never got below 5 throughout the study of the first year. But look at Kentucky Bluegrass. It was down at 1. Look how low this 20% does on Kentucky Bluegrass, down to 1. But Kentucky Bluegrass was up at a 5. And I would argue that a 5 is probably acceptable to some people. A 5 is probably acceptable to me. Okay? Because I don't particularly care. I just want some green grass out there so my kids can have fun on it. That's it. As long as we can put like a water slide out there on a birthday or a 4th of July, I'm fine. It doesn't make any difference to me. So a 5 is probably fine with me. And Kentucky Bluegrass is that choice. I would have to have that. If anything above 40% ET was acceptable pretty much the entire year on Kentucky Bluegrass. So you can lower the turf down, or the water down low with tall fescue. You can lower the water down low with tall fescue and be fine. Look at 60% ET was pretty much the exact same as 80 and 90. It was pretty high, 7s. It was never really below 7 the entire study. That's 60% ET with tall fescue. That's pretty good. So here is the difference between tall fescue and Kentucky Bluegrass side by side right here. And you see this, if you've ever been to Kentucky Field Day before they shut the program down, we had all those, or Dr. Munchall had all those tall fescue plots out there, hundreds of them, of those tall fescue plots. And then right across the little alleyway were all the Kentucky Bluegrass plots. And you could see it was just like night and day. When it was dry, that Kentucky Bluegrass just started shutting down and went into survival mode. And the tall fescue, it would eventually do that, but it took a lot longer for that to happen. Okay? Now let's look at Bermuda grass and Zoysia. Same conditions, same exact everything. We have visual quality of Bermuda grass starting out at about 5. And Bermuda grass under these, when you start lowering the water, all the turf grasses went up to about 8. All the Bermuda grasses under all the water went up to about 8 and stayed at 8, roughly speaking, until 40 days out. Then the 20% ET started to finally decline, and it wasn't until you're 60 days out here before it dropped below acceptable qualities at 20% ET. Guys, keep this in mind. 20% ET, you would have to be in severe drought. In other words, they're covering the plots when it starts raining. There's no rain getting on these plots. Okay. If you weren't covering the plots, it's unlikely that the soil moisture would get down low enough, at least on a regular annual basis, to where you would see this. It's going to rain some, even if it was an inch a month. It's probably going to be greater than 20% ET. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be. If it's an inch a week, that'd be 4 inches a month. And yeah, so that'd be more than 20% ET if it just rained an inch a month. So the point is, you might not ever even get down that low just with natural rainfall. Okay, with 20% ET with Bermuda grass. And you see this. It's very good quality at 20%, but 40% really never got below acceptable. They're all very, very good. Okay? Very little water required for Bermuda grass. When you go to Zoysia grass, look at the separation on Zoysia grass. Look at this massive separation between 20 and 100% ET. It goes from a quality of 8 all the way down to a quality of 2 at the lowest ET level of 20%. And it only took about 25, 30 days for the 20% ET to result in the quality score of less than acceptable. Shut the water off down to 20% ET, and the Zoysia grass just tanks very quickly. Happens from 20%, maybe you get another week or two from 40%, maybe you get another week or so from 60%, But all of these result in unacceptable zoysia grass, 20, 40, and 60. It was only the 80 and 100 that resulted in acceptable turf. But look how good the turf is. I mean, they're 8s. I mean, 80% ET on this particular zoysia was an 8. So that's pretty good looking turf. Okay. So here it is. I marked it all to creation here with all these red marks, but there is no doubt, at least not in any scientist's mind that I'm aware of, that zoysia grass is going to require more water than Bermuda grass. It's always going to be that way. I don't care how many stripes you paint on a lion, it's never going to be a tiger. It's not going to happen. It's always going to be a lion. It might look like a tiger. It might be the same size as a tiger, but it's not. It's a lion. It is zoysia grass. It's always going to be that way. It's going to require more water. Now what I want to do now though is just real briefly, I already had it up, sorry. This is a photograph that I took of under a rainout shelter here in Lexington, 2020, July 10th of 2020. And on the left-hand side of this picture is a zoysia grass plot that we were doing a study on with NTEP. And what we were doing is we were waiting until the turfgrass went below acceptable limits, and then we would apply a certain amount of water. And then we would count the amount of water we had to apply to maintain turfgrass above it. But we would not apply any water at all as long as the turfgrass appeared acceptable. So we'd have to go out there regularly. And if we saw the turfgrass was unacceptable, then we would apply water to bring it back to acceptable levels. And you see on the left, the zoysia grass, I had applied, or by our staff and our students had applied, 1.5 inches of water over the 6 weeks that we had been looking at this zoysia grass. Right next to it was Bermuda grass. Now, you're going to ask me what zoysia grass that is. I can't remember what zoysia grass that is. But I know this Bermuda was latitude 36. The zoysia grass, I can't remember. I apologize. I'd have to go look up the map. And the Bermuda grass, we didn't apply any water over 6 weeks. 0. And you can see the difference right here on the screen. So if you've been sold a bunch of nonsense from whoever about putting in zoysia grass because it's more drought tolerant, or it's going to survive drought better than Bermuda grass, I'm sorry you were deceived. But you were deceived. That is not going to be the case in the majority of cases. Bermuda grass is going to be able to tolerate and resist dry conditions in almost every case better than zoysia grass. Now, I know this was, I'm pretty sure this was a zoysia japonica. I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure this was a japonica, not a matrella. So, this is what I'm saying. You're not, you need to ask the right people the question. And if you ask a zoysia grass farmer, which one's more tolerant of drought, he's going to say zoysia. I mean, right here it is on the screen. No, it's not zoysia. It's Bermuda. Now, I'm not knocking zoysia. Some of the best fairways I've ever seen are zoysia grass. Some of the most resilient turf grass when it comes to certain stresses is zoysia grass. I personally don't manage it because it requires a skill set that I just don't possess, but I'd prefer Bermuda grass. But if you have the right tools, zoysia grass can be fantastic. I mean, great. I mean, you can go down to Naples, Fort Myers, and see some unbelievable zoysia grass down there. It's great. But given the same exact conditions and you want to maximize the water savings, the Bermuda grass is going to be the one that maximizes the water savings, not the zoysia grass. Okay, let's go back to the paper. So on the paper, we've covered all this side by side. Now the next year, remember these figures over here on the left. The next year, the bluegrass had died, but the next year, these panels here are the same exact visual quality, but you only see 3 panels because the Kentucky bluegrass had died. But you'll still see the same thing. The tall fescue has a separation here. Of course, you don't have Kentucky bluegrass compared to because it died. But you still see the 60, 80, and 100% ET being more than acceptable all the way out. And you still see the zoysia grass falling sharply when the study began, down with 20 and 40% being less than acceptable very soon. And it took 40 days for the Bermuda grass at 40% to become unacceptable. So you're seeing 20 and 40% from Bermuda grass being unacceptable, but the 60, 80, and 100 are acceptable. But the Zoysia grass, it just needed more water. They needed to apply more water to it. And by the way, this is what a calibration study looks like. This is not I guess this is a calibration study, but it's calibration with water. This is exactly a calibration graph. So if you've ever, I can't divorce myself from soil fertility. Sorry, it can't happen. Okay. But whenever you read a soil test and someone tells you should apply this much phosphorus because the soil test says this, what I tell people is, how do you know you need to apply that? How does that soil test lab know they need to apply that? Because they haven't done a calibration study that I'm aware of. It is not easy to find data like this. This is a calibration study. So if you just took all these lines and instead of ET, 20, 40, 60, and 80, 100% ET, you put on there 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 pounds of potassium, and then you see these lines separate out, that tells me that I need to apply X amount of potassium to result in a certain quality turfgrass. You follow? So that's a calibration. I'm calibrating this particular plant to an amount of potassium required to maintain a certain quality turf. In this case, they're calibrating with water. But we do the same thing with soil tests. We have to do a calibration so that we can tell the end user, this is how much you need to apply, because applying this much isn't enough. And that's what they're doing here with water. You need to apply 100% ET to Kentucky bluegrass because 80% wasn't enough. 40% wasn't enough. Okay, so you'll see this coming out if I ever get this thing published. It's in the hands of the reviewers right now, but I have another paper that's been submitted for a soil testing thing, and you'll see this exact same graphs whenever I get it published, but it has to do with an element in the soil test element. And this is what I say is lacking in the turfgrass literature, lacking in the soil test literature. We don't have calibrations for soil testing and nutrients. Well, I shouldn't say we don't have any. We have some, but we generally don't do this because they're very difficult to do. Why? Because we don't always deal with turf grasses that are actually deficient in potassium. In this case, you can artificially create a deficient water scenario by covering the turf. That's what they did with the rainout shelter. They covered it and they created a deficient scenario. You can't do that with soil nutrition. You can't do that with soil potassium. You have to find a soil that happens to be deficient and then go out and do a calibration study on it. And so you just don't see that frequently in the literature. And because of that, I don't have that much confidence in recommending nutrients from a soil test value. But yet every soil test report goes out has the same stuff. Apply so many pounds of P, so many pounds of K. You should apply so many pounds of manganese or magnesium or whatever. Well, they don't know how much they should apply. They haven't done a calibration study on that. Drives me insane. Oh, man. Oh, Chuck Benzing again sent one Turfgrass Epistemology membership. Thanks so much. It was for KWL 1763. So KWL, you can go into the posts of the YouTube and get the link to the Facebook group and join the Facebook group and have some fun over there chatting with us. You can thank Chuck for the membership. Thank you very much, Chuck, for your generosity for other people to be able to get a sneak peek behind the curtain on the membership. And Michael Raymond, welcome to the entry level. I'm glad you can do the same thing. Go check out the Facebook group and read the posts on YouTube and go over to Facebook and read all those posts as well. Okay. All right. We can wrap this thing up here. Okay. Now leaf water. I'm not going to talk about this leaf relative water content. That's more for scientists to worry about. Okay. But if you want to, it's all in there. I'm also not going to talk about there's leaf water content. I'm not going to talk about the electrolyte leakage. Again, that's more for scientists, but I will read a little snippet at the end. Okay. So I already talked about all that. Okay, turfgrass species that have exhibited deep rooting potential and drought avoidance capabilities responded well to deficit irrigation of the study. We're talking about tall fescue, or the authors are talking about tall fescue and Bermuda grass. For example, earlier work in Kansas indicated that Midlawn Bermuda and Mustang tall fescue had greater ability than Meyer Zoysia to root deeply in the soil profile. So that gives, other people have found that their deeper rooted turf grasses are generally more drought tolerant. Okay, so that's very consistent with what the other literature is saying, is what these authors are indicating. Okay, so let me just briefly, very, very briefly talk about leaf relative water content and electrolyte leakage. I'm just going to read this. Changes in leaf relative water content in all turf grasses during both study periods is presented in Figure 3 and 4. The present study indicated that turf quality was acceptable until leaf relative water content dropped to 76% for bluegrass, 77% tall fescue, 65% for Bermuda, and 76% for Zoysia. Now, that doesn't mean anything really to the end user because you're not going to even know how to measure that. But for us, we can say, okay, well, Bermuda grass, the leaf relative water content was only 65%. It had to get down to 65% before we saw unacceptable turf grass. So that's meaningful in order to help explain why we're seeing what we're seeing. Okay, this suggests that Bermuda had a greater ability to tolerate. Hang on. Okay, this suggests that Bermuda had a greater ability to tolerate leaf desiccation before a visible decline in quality occurred. Okay, so it might not just be the roots. It may be something else physically in the plant tissue itself that is also imparting a drought tolerance ability to Bermuda grass. They mentioned that also down here. Oh, wait, I thought they talked about... Oh, yeah, it does right here. Okay. The present study indicated that turf quality was acceptable until leaf electrolyte leakage increased to 22% for for bluegrass, 24 for tall fescue, and 26 for Zoysia, but then 38 for Bermuda grass, suggesting that membranes of cells in Bermuda were least affected by low levels of deficit irrigation. So there's a little bit of additional information for those who might not know. Yes, roots are immensely important and play a tremendously important role in drought tolerance. There's no question. That's how the water gets into the plant. But the plant leaves and the actual stems and other parts of the plant can also play a role in its drought tolerance mechanism. And in this case, they're saying that the cell membranes themselves were least affected by it, by drought situations, as opposed to the Zoysia grass, which is at 26%. In summary, these tests indicate that turf grasses requiring the least water to maintain quality between June and September were Midlawn Bermuda and Rebel 2 tall fescue. Tall fescue had lower water requirements than Meyer Zoysia the first year, but similar the second. Combinations of heat and bluegrass billbug infestations and deficit irrigation stress resulted in poor bluegrass performance under the conditions of this test. Physiological measurements indicated that Bermuda grass was able to tolerate the lower leaf relative water content and higher level of electrolyte leakage before quality declined to an unacceptable level. So let me just put it back on the screen one more time so everybody understands the importance of it. Is these figures right here is really the meat and potatoes of this paper. All 4 turf grasses, all in the same setting, all in the same figure, with all the ET levels, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. And Bermuda grass wins hands down relative to Zoysia, and turf-type tall fescue wins hands down compared to Kentucky bluegrass. So, but all this means, guys, if you're managing Kentucky bluegrass or Zoysia grass, it doesn't mean you can't have good quality turf. In fact, the Zoysia grass was floating up here in the 8s, quality of 8s, and whereas the Bermuda grass might have been floating around in the 7s. Okay? So the quality of the Zoysia grass can be superior. It can be, but it's going to require more water. That's what it's going to require. And right now, the GCSAA is right in the middle of doing all this water survey work. In fact, I was on a meeting today, and we're getting the public report finished up and the science reports being worked on and resubmitted and all this stuff, because water is an immensely important part of our industry. And if you're interested in, that is a question on the survey, if you're interested, or your members or owners are interested in applying less water, or you're in a situation where you're in a state like, I don't know, Arizona or Nevada, or I don't know what, somewhere that has water restrictions, and you're looking at making an impact. I've said this before. I would start with genetics. I wouldn't start by changing your nozzles. I wouldn't start by putting in ET irrigation. I wouldn't start by getting a moisture meter, a TDR meter. I wouldn't start with that. I would start with genetics. And yes, I know I'm talking about 50 acres of fairways or what, and roughs, or 50 acres of roughs and 20 something acres of fairways. I know. I understand that. But you're slapping lipstick on a pig if you're trying to go out there and hand water this part of the green. If your goal is to reduce water use and you're throwing a bunch of water out there on a turf grass that's at best never going to reach your expectations in terms of reducing water use. At absolute best, its greatest potential won't reach your expectations, then you need to start with a new canvas. Start with good genetics. That's what I would start with. And that's a question on the survey. Have you switched to a more drought-tolerant turf grass? Not did you switch to a drought-tolerant turf grass did you switch to a turf grass that you were told is drought-tolerant, but did you switch to one that is drought-tolerant? Did you switch from a Zoysia to Bermuda? Or did you switch from a Kentucky bluegrass in your roughs to a fescue in your roughs? Someplace that, you can't put fescue. I guess you could put fescue in a fairway, but I don't know many high-quality courses are going to have fescue in their fairway. I guess it's possible, but a fescue in the rough would maybe be appropriate. You could do that, right? So these sorts of concepts, I'm not saying you can go out there tomorrow and start doing that. That's a major undertaking. But when the opportunity comes up, when it presents itself, and that is a goal to reduce water use, ask the right person the question. And the right person is usually a breeder or a stress physiologist, a turfgrass physiologist. Ask them or listen to this channel. We're going over that now. So just a point that it's very, very important to get the right genetics in there. And if I'm not saying necessarily right, it's just the right genetics for your objective. Because if your objective is to have an okay lawn, then don't put Kentucky bluegrass in. At least if you're in the right region, if you're in the region for that growth. If you're in the region where only Kentucky bluegrass grows, then you do what you got to do. But if you're looking for perfection, you can have really, really, really good looking tall fescue, no question. But a perfect golf course looking lawn in a cool season area, Kentucky bluegrass is going to be superior in most cases than tall fescue, but it's going to require more inputs. Okay? Let's go to the questions. I'm going to go back in time here and start reading from the beginning from members first. I'll come back to some of these comments I see already because I need to get the members first. Actually, I don't see any questions from members. Well, here's a good comment from a member. This is definitely true. Joe Callis says, Kentucky 31 is pasture grass. No, well, all turf type tall fescue was, I think, if I remember correctly, came from like a pasture sort of history. But Kentucky 31 is not a lawn grass, okay? When you go to Lowe's and you go to Home Depot and you go to Ace or wherever else it is, it's going to be the bag sitting right next to the register. Don't buy that for your lawn. Buy it for your horses and your paddock out back, for sure. Go ahead and knock yourself out. But do not buy Kentucky 31 for your home lawn. It is not recommended, at least in the state of Kentucky, for home lawns. Get a turf-type tall fescue. You can go in the back of some of these big box stores, and there may be a turf-type tall fescue blend. And beyond that, I would even recommend, at least in Kentucky, I would even recommend pure tall fescue, like blends of pure tall fescue. Oftentimes you get a lot of bluegrass in there and perennial ryegrass in there because people want to see a greening response that week. They don't have the patience to wait for that tall fescue to germinate. So they can put these other cheaper things in there like perennial ryegrass to get it turned green. Just call, there's plenty of people that will sell it to you. I go to Hogan Seed. You want to know, I don't make a nickel from Hogan, but I get all of my seed from Hogan. And I'll tell you exactly why I do it. Because they supported the Turfgrass Research Center. When we needed seed, we call Hogan and they'd get it to us. And they were very, very polite, very respectful, and they helped out the program. And so now I buy all my seed personally with my own money from Hogan. They don't give me anything, okay? And you can go on there and you can see all their blends of Kentucky bluegrass, all their blends of perennial rye, all their blends of tall fescue, and whatever the case is. And they use a lot of A-list products. They use a lot of NTEP products. I've had a lot of success with them. So you can just go to them and get their turf-type tall fescue blend and avoid Kentucky 31 It's going to be a 50-pound bag. It's going to cost you about $150 to get it delivered usually. It's going to be a little bit more than Kentucky 31 you buy at the, big box store at the cash register for $60 or whatever they're selling it for. But you're buying junk when you buy Kentucky 31 for your lawn. Okay? You want good genetics, get a good quality seed from a good quality seed distributor. Okay, question from Mike Conroy. Are the percentages, say 60% of ET or ET reference after the crop coefficient? I think they did ET by, I think they had it in here, Mike. They measured it. Yeah, they did it by evapotranspiration. So they did it actual evapotranspiration, so ET actual, so it was not a reference ET. It says actual. ETA was the actual evapotranspiration they did. I don't think it doesn't appear that they put in like a reference or crop coefficient into the, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have that on. It doesn't look like they put in a crop coefficient to factor down to 0.8 or 0.6 or something like that. I could be wrong, but I don't see that in here. I'm just scanning through it. Okay. Sorry. So Chuck Benzing says 2 mowing heights were mentioned in the introduction, but maybe I missed the study. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just using that as an example to explain split plots or strip plots. There's a reason why we do certain statistical models. They didn't do 2 mowing heights. I'm sorry for that. Didn't mean to confuse you, Chuck. They had 1 mowing height. I think it was a 2 to 2 1/4 inch, something like that. So Shane Henderson says, thanks for covering this. I was sold on Zoysia when we renovated our property. I wish we went with Bermuda. Although the Zoysia grass looks good when properly maintained and BMP are adhered to, it is pricey. Yeah, it is. I mean, back in the late 90s, Zoysia grass really picked up in popularity. Like it was this wonder grass. And it can be. I mean, go down and, I'll leave the names out of it. But there's some courses down in South Florida that's like, I mean, it's ridiculous how good they look with Zoysia grass on them. So there's nothing wrong with any turf grass. What's wrong is getting the turf grass put in that you don't know how to manage. And then you start throwing a lot of money at it without the knowledge of how to manage it. It's like buying a firearm. You buy a firearm and you don't know how to cock the hammer. You don't know how to load it. You have no idea what you're doing with it. It's dangerous. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, with the turf grasses, you just need to know how to manage it and how to have the tools to manage it properly. That's all. I don't know. Yeah, Joe Callis says he's bought a lot of Twin CDC. They donated a percent to University of Minnesota Turfgrass. Okay, good. Glad to know. If that's true, then I'll definitely promote Twin City Seed. There was one comment earlier on that wasn't, that's all the member questions. There's one comment earlier on that says, where was it? Can't seem to find it, but Michael Raymond says the amount of truth is hard to comprehend. I'm spitting the Kool-Aid out and plan on making an extra mortgage payment with the savings. You probably could. In fact, I can assure you some of the members I've met with could easily do that with the amount of money they've wasted with some of these charlatans selling all these, wonder drugs and wonder turfgrass products. You could easily do that. Thank you does not describe my appreciation for this channel. Oh, well, thank you, Mike Raymond. I appreciate your support. Consider being a member. It's cheap. You get double that content if you're a member, and you get to have this fun on Monday mornings as well as Tuesday evenings if you enjoy it that much. Don't forget, there's a podcast. If you don't like to watch the show, you can always listen to the show. The podcasts are released usually around 24 to 48 hours after the live show ends, which is ending right now. So I appreciate everybody showing up. I'll be here for the next 3 or 4 weeks. I'm going to be gone quite a bit this fall, giving lectures around the United States, traveling quite a bit here and there. I'm trying to do some content for the show as I travel, but we'll see how that goes. But I'm here for the next 3 or 4 weeks as I wrap up the water content. And about the time when nobody else is worried about fungus because we've moved out of the season, I'll probably start talking about fungus in the lawns after the troubles with fungus during the warm season is over with. So apologize for that, but I'm trying to get these trying to go over the topics in a thorough way, and that just takes some time. Guys and gals, I really appreciate all your support. Subscribers and members, I really thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. I will see the members on Monday morning, and the rest of you I'll see you next Tuesday evening. Thanks. Bye.